Tonight I will be telling 7 horrifying stories. From being a security guard in the basement of a hospital, to unsuspecting campers. Tonight's video has some twists and turns I would personally never want to experience. A huge thank you to the writers who allowed me to share their stories. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, likes and comments are always appreciated, as I read every single one. Subscribing if you're new is as well. Enjoy the video. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. Possession. It's the strangest thing. Being out of control of your own body. What could it possibly feel like? Agony? Peace? Nothingness? These are the questions that raced through my head ever since that day in 2011. The day I witnessed the impossible. The day I lost my best friend to something beyond reason. Something beyond our reality. 7 years ago, my friends Ellie, Chris, Mark, and I went on an unsuspecting camping trip in the eastern panhandle of West Virginia. We had all been true outdoorsy types, and liked a challenge whenever we went. It was our yearly tradition. Apparently, it had been someone else's too. That was the biggest mistake of our lives, camping on the night of a blood moon. We came into Pawpaw, stupid name I know, around 3 in the evening. We hadn't gotten anything for lunch yet, so we stopped at a McDonald's in town. I swear no matter how small a town is, it will always have a McDonald's. There were only 2 other locals dining there, and we could hear every bit of what they said. We should have taken them seriously. "Blood moon tonight," said the elderly woman of the couple. "You know what that means, Lester." I know, the man groaned. "Stay out of them damned woods." "I heard the same stories you did, Edna." He seemed disgruntled. "That's right," Edna told him. "They say things come out on a blood moon. Bad things." She joked with him, and reached across the table to tickle him. It must have been nice to have such a relationship when you get that old. I wasn't going back there anyway. Ain't nothing in season yet, unless you want to be pinging at the leaves. He ignored her tickles entirely. "You're no fun," she told him. She poked one gnarled finger into his shoulder, and that's all there was to their conversation. It lasted all of a minute, but would have changed our lives forever. We were such fools. "The old folks are always the superstitious ones," Mark chimed in. I hadn't been the only one listening to the elderly couple chat. Yeah, they can't help it though. They were raised in a time when there wasn't any proof to prove them wrong. Same with their parents and so on, Chris had told us. We all agreed with him and laughed about them later. We got in our car and drove it down many of the back roads, looking for a place to pull off and begin our trek. Around 4, we found a spot to set the car for the night. It was one of the worst roads I had ever seen, and looked nearly abandoned. As we unloaded, we talked and joked around. We were having the time of our lives. Just the simple joy of nature and friends. In the back, we had only a few things. A cooler with snacks, a bottle of water each, 2 tents, and 4 sleeping bags. We divided the load as evenly as we could, and made our way through the first edge of underbrush. I realize now that it was colder in those woods. A lot colder. None of us cared though. It was a scorcher of a day, and we were glad to be out of the heat. We should have brought bug spray, Ellie piped up about a mile into our hike. "I know, these things are thicker in fog," I exclaimed. The bugs had begun swarming us almost instantly, and were a constant cloud buzzing around our heads. "We'll deal with it for now," Mark told us from the front of the line. "It's just a day." "How far are we? Or do you know where we're going?" Chris hollered to him. "No, but I'll know the place when I see it," Mark told him confidently. We passed by one rather open spot, but Mark determined it was just barely too small. We should have stayed there. It would have been alright. We trekked another 2 miles before we finally found the right spot. By then it was a little past 5, and we began to set up camp. Our little clearing was just big enough to accommodate our tents. It seemed perfect. Too perfect. "Alright, we got ourselves a nice little base camp," I said to everyone. "Should we get the fire going?" "Yeah, I'll gather up some firewood," Ellie said enthusiastically as she trotted off into the woods. We could hear her breaking off dead branches and gathering sticks. "What do we do now?" Chris asked. He was newer to camping than the rest of us. "Anything you want. Look at nature, help get the fire going, try to find a stream, anything." Mark told him with a hand on his shoulder. I guess I'll get some stones to make a fire pit with, Chris said, looking around. I walked to Mark and handed him his water bottle. Mine was a little under half empty. Cheers, I told him jokingly as I tapped his bottle. Cheers, he repeated. We sat around at camp for a while as Chris and Ellie got stuff for the fire. Mark and I got the tents out of our packs and assembled them in the clearing. Once constructed, we rolled out everyone's sleeping bags inside. They got back right around the time we were finished. Got the stuff, Ellie told us, dropping her bundle. Chris did the same. Mark and I got to work constructing the fire while they rested. Finally, we had ourselves a nice little camp that a woodsman would have been proud of. We lit the fire. In the instant before we did, the forest seemed to stop. No birds, no squirrels, no deer, not even a leaf rustling in the wind. We all felt it, an unnecessary tense moment. A few seconds later, life started back up. The noises of the forest returned, and life went on untouched. Spooky was the only thing Chris said. We all nodded in agreement. Later, we just forgot all about it. In hindsight, if I had to guess, that was when they showed up. I'd bet anything on it. The rest of the evening, we sat around our campfire feeding it occasionally, laughing often, and talking always. We sat and leaned back, pointing out stars and marveling at the moon's orange shade. At one point, Ellie even busted a bag of marshmallows out from the cooler. We roasted them on sticks, and ate them just like that because no one had brought anything to make s'mores. What kind of camping is it if you don't have marshmallows? She asked, and we all laughed. We were feeling good and having fun. We didn't know it then, but the chaos would start in only 3 hours, right at the stroke of midnight. We climbed in our tents around 10, worn out from our hike. We had no trouble falling asleep on the uneven ground. We were fast asleep when Chris got out of his tent to take a whiz. It was 11:30. Mark must have heard something because he roused me from my sleep. He was sitting up and had an ear cocked to the woods. "Mark, what time is it?" I whispered raggedly. He put a finger to his lips and shushed me. "Mark, what?" He shushed me more vigorously this time. "Listen," he whispered. It was barely audible. I cocked an ear with him and heard something too. Footsteps. Footsteps and voices. I could hear whoever it was trudging through the brush and growth. "Mark, it's probably just Chris or Ellie." I told him, trying to comfort myself more than him. I knew I was wrong before he said anything. "No, it's more than one person. Why would they be talking?" He had a point. I was somewhere between confusion and fright. "Can you tell what they're saying?" I asked him. Even in the dark of the tent, I could see him shake his head. "It's just mumbling. I can't hear them." He told me. "What should we do?" I asked him. I was getting nervous by then, and my palms started to sweat. "Nothing yet. Just wait. When we can't hear them anymore, we'll go out and look around." He sounded just as nervous as I felt, and it gave me a little relief. "What about Ellie and Chris? Should we wake them up?" We were still whispering in our little tent. The voices had gotten farther away. "Yes, definitely. I don't want to be out there with just us." So we sat and waited. It seemed like an eternity, but it couldn't have been more than 2 minutes. Eventually, the voices vanished. "Alright, now we go," I said. I unzipped the door very slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. I stuck my head out and looked around twice. There was nothing there. I began to crawl out and waved Mark on behind me. We snuck to the other tent and unzipped it. Inside lay only one shape. It was Ellie. I shook her awake and she looked around. "Sam?" she asked after blinking twice. "Is that you?" "And me," Mark said, poking his head around me. "Why are you here? What time is it?" She was still confused. "We heard something," I said. "Where's Chris?" "He's right here." She mumbled, bringing her hand down. It fell in an empty sleeping bag. Her eyes widened, and awareness flooded them. "Chris?" she asked. "Where is he?" "We don't know. There were people just out here. Voices. They went that way," Mark said, pointing down the slope. "Did they take him?" "No, that wouldn't happen, would it?" Her terror was almost full-blown. The look on our faces confirmed her fears. "We have to find him then. Let's go." "Yes, let's go," I said. We clambered out of the tent and back into the clearing. The blood moon lit the night in an almost unreal way. We started down the hill not saying a word. Halfway down, a light appeared way ahead of us. It was fire. A torch. Whoa, hold on. Mark whispered, placing a hand in front of us. What is it? Fire? Who's lighting torches out here? Ellie questioned. Mark and I had no answer. The fire began to move as it was carried, and briefly we caught the silhouette of the figure holding it. After a few more feet, it stopped, and was placed in something. We were maybe 200 yards away from all of this. Another torch was lit, and brought about 8 feet from the other. It was well lit, but too far away to make out anything. We need to get closer, I suggested. Are you crazy? We have no idea what these... Ellie began, and was cut off by Mark. He's right. Mark said calmly, we're too far away, and we still haven't found Chris. Now I wish to God with every fiber of my being that I hadn't been right. I would give anything just to go back and leave, but the past is the past. We crept the rest of the way down the embankment to flat ground and stalked closer. From our new position, we could see them. In a large clearing was a ring of about 40 people, all in hooded cloaks. They stood, heads bowed, and hands together chanting. In the center of this ring was a square wood frame. Suspended in the middle by ropes on his wrists and ankles hung Chris. He looked more scared than anyone ever could. He was sobbing as the group chanted. The group of men chanted in unison. It was no language I've ever heard before. In my mind, it must have been the language of devils and all that is unholy. That is all it could be. Chris continued his sobbing. Then a new figure stepped into view behind Chris. This man was obviously the leader. His robe was billowy and had many intricate gold swirls and designs running across it. The chanting stopped as he approached. He came around from Chris's left side and left our view momentarily. When he re-emerged, he had produced a large knife. Chris cried harder. Stop, my child. The man's voice was deep and powerful. Chris stopped and looked right at him. He tried to speak, but merely mouthed the word why. The man turned our way for a second, and I got a glimpse of his face. He was old. His face had been scarred by the wrinkles of age, more than any man I'd ever seen. He stood still in front of Chris, looking him in the eyes. Then he looked up towards the moon and mouthed a soundless scream. Then he began to chant, and the group joined him. They repeated the chant twice, and then stopped. The man in the gold-lined robe raised his knife and brought it down slowly. It traced through Chris's flesh, opening dark red wounds in his chest. They did not bleed. Chris did not scream. The man stopped when he had 3 different symbols on his chest in a triangular pattern. They were foreign and unrecognizable to me. They were strangely sharp yet curved at the same time, each ending in a curl. Chris hung from the frame limply. It is time. That was all the man said to start it all. There was a great rush of wind and a feeling of raw power. It passed through the woods like a gale and buffeted at everything. Everything but the man and Chris. They were stock still for this hurricane force wind. It seemed like they were in a pocket of calm. The eye of the storm. I remember seeing some of the cultists even fall over, but most kept their footing. Then it stopped, and Chris looked around. He said 2 words I'll never forget. There's nothing. Then he began to thrash and spasm violently. The whole frame shook, and the group backed away in awe. He writhed and screamed, muscles tightening and pulling. I could see every vein in his body, grotesquely outlined beneath the skin. He then began to grow. I wasn't sure at first, but it was happening. He bulged and lengthened. It looked like his skin wouldn't contain the muscle underneath, but it did. It was hard to tell for sure, but I think he stopped at around 8 feet tall. The ropes were slack enough so that he could stand now. He broke the thick lines with ease. What used to be Chris now stood in the middle of a wary group, breathing deeply. It looked around a couple times, then threw its head back and roared. There is no other word to describe what it did. It hadn't screamed or yelled. It had roared. It was long and guttural. Once it was finished, it sniffed around. When it moved, its clothes ripped in little places. Later they would become rags. Then the thing turned and looked right where we had been hiding. The group looked with it. Who's there? Asked one of the cloaked figures. We turned and bolted back up the hill, while the group yelled and pursued us. The used-to-be Chris thing roared again, and charged after us. We made it to the top of the hill, and in our panic, Mark ran in a different direction. To this day, I'm not sure what became of him. But I still have hope that he made it out. Behind us, the thing plowed through trees, and members knocking everything out of the way. We arrived at camp and kept running. I remember picking up some of the still smoldering embers of the fire as I ran through it. The noise got closer and closer behind us as we ran. We shouldn't have come this far in. We'll never make it, I thought to myself. About a mile back through the woods, the noise stopped for a second. Ellie turned and slowed down just as I heard a tree fall. The thing picked it up with ease and hurled it right at her. It hit her with the force of a freight train, and I watched her upper body get pulverized. I turned just in time to see it grab her still living remains and crush them beneath its hands. Something thick and dark ran between its fingers. I ran faster as it began to close the distance. We were passing landmarks I recognized from the hike down as we got closer and closer to the car. Then I formed a painful stitch in my side and was limp running through the woods. It made it all the easier for the thing to catch up to me. I heard its approach and knew it couldn't have been more than 15 feet behind me. When I could see the car, I felt in every part of me that I was about to collapse, but it was my only hope. Stitches in both sides racked my body as I made my desperate escape from the beast. In that last bit of underbrush before the road, I actually felt his fingers scrape my back. I almost fell and regained my balance when I crashed through the tree line, panting heavily. I scurried around the car and fumbled it open. I fell in the driver's seat and gasped painfully. I looked back in the trees expecting to see it fly out and flip the car, but it did no such thing. I scanned the forest and found it. Standing right where I was only moments before was a hulking abomination staring loathingly at the car. Its amber eyes stared out from the trees as some invisible force held it in. I flipped at the bird and closed my eyes. I'm so thankful for that barrier. I spent the night in that car trying to recover from my 4-mile sprint. I slept at some point and woke at the crack of dawn. I scanned the woods again but saw nothing, only the carnage it had created in its fury. I thought of Ellie and wondered if I should get her body. No way, I'm not going back in. There might not even be a body left. She had been hit by a flying tree after all. Then I thought of Mark but brushed it off. The thing came for me, and I had given him plenty of time to escape. I hope. I started up the old car and drove straight through Pawpaw, and didn't stop until I got to my town of Wheeling. That's where I sit now. 7 years later, recounting the night that changed my life. I'm still scared of that thing. It's always here. I always see his amber eyes, full of hate and murder. I see them in the dead of night, in the corner, out my window, anywhere they'll fit. Those weren't the eyes of my friend. They were that of the devil. I still wonder if Mark made it out. It's been 7 years and no contact, so my hope is starting to fade. I try to keep up with the news from over east as much as I can. It's hard with such a small town as Pawpaw. There have been 5 more groups of campers, and 3 solo hikers that have disappeared in those woods. One of the groups went missing only last week. That's why I'm writing this here and now. I guess those folks just weren't as lucky as I was. I worked security there for a long time. Between the long hours and close coworkers, it was like a second home to me. I'd been there longer than anyone else, so the newbies always came to me for advice. For the most part, I liked my job. We lived in a small area, so chaotic events were rare. I worked in the basement, just a morgue and some storage closets. So my shifts were always quiet and peaceful. It was a particularly slow night. We only had 2 bodies in storage. They were a mother and daughter, fresh from a murder-suicide. According to the report, it was a pretty horrific scene. The mother shot her daughter point blank in the chest, and then turned the gun on herself. The poor girl was only 8 years old. It was almost abnormal for the town. We lived in such a small area that the only crimes we really ever had were drug-related. I was filling paperwork at my desk when I heard a tapping noise coming from down the hall. This piqued my interest because everyone else working on the floor had gone home for the day. I got up to investigate. The sound grew louder as I approached the morgue. I went into the morgue and heard the sound coming from drawer number 6. I read the attached clipboard to find out who or what was in there. It was the daughter's body. I placed the clipboard back in place, and the tapping stopped abruptly. Curious, I placed my ear to the drawer to see what I could hear. That's when the power went out. The drawer began shaking violently. Metal roared and clanged together as I jumped back and fumbled around for my flashlight. I shined my light on the drawer as it shook, and the clipboard fell off. It began to shake open, and then it stopped out of nowhere. What the hell? I struggled for air as I shined my light around to make sure no one was there, messing with me. I was terrified. I looked back at the drawer and there stood a girl in a white dress. I jumped, but tried my best to gain my composure. "What are you doing down here? Where are your parents?" I asked gently. The girl didn't move. She stood in place, staring blankly past me. "Come with me. We'll go upstairs and try to figure this out, okay?" I gently reached out my hand to grab her, and she let out a scream. I recoiled, startled. "Mommy, please," she pleaded, still staring at the wall behind me. There were tears in her eyes. I heard a gunshot go off, and blood began pouring from her chest. Her white dress began turning a crimson red as she collapsed on the floor. "No, no, no," I cried, as I dropped to my knees to check for a pulse. I felt nothing. My hands were covered in blood. I tried to radio for help, but all I could hear on the other end was deafening static. I sobbed as her blood spilled out on the floor. I turned around with my hands on my head, trying to catch my breath and think of a plan. I turned around and she was gone. No sign that she was ever there. My hands were now clean. Wanting to comfort myself and think rationally of the situation, I tried to brush it off as some sort of mental breakdown, that I would just take a few days off of work and it would all be fine. I went back to my office to try and calm down, but all I could think about was the little girl, the fear in her eyes as she collapsed. I decided I needed a cigarette to calm my nerves. The power was still out, so trying the elevator was useless. I tried to open the door to the stairwell and, to my horror, it was locked. I was stuck down there. The full realization of the events leading up to the moment set in, and I began to panic. I couldn't catch my breath. It was in that moment that I heard a door open and close, and a strange wheezing and gurgling sound that I'd never heard before. I felt a chill down my spine as I was hit with an immense amount of dread. The blood turned to ice when I realized the sound was coming from a chemical storage closet. I slowly crept toward the closet as the sense of dread grew larger. I opened the door and a naked woman was facing the wall. "Ma'am, you can't be in here," I said. No response. "Ma'am, judging by your wheeze, you could use some medical attention. Let me take you upstairs and we can get you the help you need." I placed my hand on her shoulder and she turned around. She had a hole the size of a baseball blown straight through her face. Oh my God. I screamed as I turned to run. She was chasing me. I ran back to my office and slammed and locked the door behind me. She began pounding on the door. I used my weight to hold it shut. "If you're real, God, I need you to help me out here," I begged. The pounding grew louder. I managed to move a filing cabinet in front of the door and held up in the corner of the room. The pounding grew faster and louder. The filing cabinet fell over. The pounding stopped. I let out the breath I'd been holding and slid down the wall. I wondered if I was going to die down there. I needed to figure this out. I gathered enough courage to stand up and head back to the morgue. I was terrified, but I knew I had to do something if I wanted to get out of here. The faceless woman was dragging her body along behind me, leaving a bloody trail down the hallway. I almost had a feeling of calmness, like she wasn't there to hurt me. I opened drawer number 8, the one where the mother's body was being kept. It was the same woman laying there. "What happened to you?" I whispered. Suddenly I was thrown across the room and pinned to the wall. "Please don't do this. I'm trying to help you," I pleaded. I then saw the same scene of the little girl play out, but this time it was much different. I saw the gun and her assailant. Her mother was standing in front of her. "Robert, please. She's just a child. She's your daughter," she sobbed. "This isn't my daughter. Now move," the man said as he pushed the mother aside. "No, Robert," she screamed and reached for the gun. They struggled. She was shot in the face. "Mommy, please." The little girl cried. She was shot in the chest. The man placed the gun in the mother's hand. I was released from the wall. The power came back on and I fell to my knees and cried and cried. This wasn't a murder-suicide. It was a double homicide. I stood up and walked to the elevator, staring blankly ahead, trying to process everything that happened. I went up to the ground floor and walked out. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. I sat in my armchair at home and stared at the wall. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning I called the police station and made an anonymous tip. Her ex-husband Robert was arrested on 2 counts of first-degree murder. To this day, I refuse to go back in that building, but I sleep better at night knowing that I may have helped bring peace to the dead. It all started with me deciding what to do over the summer. I didn't care how I spent it, as long as it was memorable with people I care about. 2 weeks in, my best friend Stacy suggested that our friend group should go camping, since none of us have ever done anything like that before. I agreed, and so did everyone else. We had a week to prepare and get everything we would need for a 3-day trip. The people that were going was my good friend Stacy, Jack, Patrick, Alyssa, and my crush Emily. I packed a big tent that could fit 3 people, some extra food, a lot of water, a machete just in case, and a small paintball gun in case there's wildlife that could disrupt our trip and potentially do harm. The night before my trip, my friends all showed up at my house, and they said they wanted to catch the sunrise as we drove up to our camping spot. Being a little weirded out, I nodded and got ready. Before I left, I was heading back to tell my mom I'll be out for a while, and my friend Jack said he already told my mom, and that she said to have fun. The trip there was normal, although mostly silent since a lot of us were pretty exhausted by the fact it was nighttime. We arrived to the spot and admired the sunrise. I checked my phone to see reception, but there was none, and I just shrugged it off, since we're in the middle of the woods. I told some jokes and we set out to do our things, like have a small snack and enjoy the day. Night 1. By the time it was night, we all went to the campfire Patrick set up, and we were telling ghost stories. I spotted Emily sneaking glances at me, and was maybe blushing. I couldn't tell. But I didn't try to think much of it. By the time it was time to sleep, I heard someone unzipping my tent. I looked to see Emily in a baggy PJ that showed a lot of cleavage since her top wasn't buttoned correctly. She wanted to sleep in my tent, since the tent she was sleeping in, it was with Stacy, was not good because of all of Stacy's snoring. Me being the love-crazed guy I am, let her sleep next to me, but a good distance so I wouldn't accidentally poke her. She backed up and we were spooning. I tried to slowly back away, but she got my arm and wrapped it around her. She said she didn't mind it, and that it was okay if it were just me. I was mainly nervous because she shoved my hand between her chest, and she was always a modest girl who was shy around physical contact. The rest of the night was normal, but very distantly I heard a high-pitched noise. It was unclear what it was since there was night animals making louder noises, such as owls, and what I think was deer. I woke up to my hand inside her shirt, and this made me freak out for 2 reasons. 1, because Emily wasn't awake, and 2, that I might have accidentally moved my hand there in my sleep. I slowly moved so that she wouldn't wake up, but she did and laughed it off, saying it was an honest mistake. Me weirded out by how she doesn't normally act this way, didn't question it, and just got ready for the day. My friends decided to hike and I joined them. The morning got from okay to weird, since all of my friends were acting weird, and what I mean was that all their personalities seemed bland and not their own. Stacy, who had a fear of snakes, walked in tall grass where it was most likely snakes were. Patrick, a constant show-off, wasn't showing off. Rather, he's looking around for something. I don't know what for. And what I found mainly weird was Alyssa and Jack, was that they were being the most chattiest in the group. They were usually dead silent and didn't say a word to each other, or anyone. Emily was being really clingy to me, which I questioned since after this morning. She usually kept that kind of stuff to herself, but she was being more revealing. The sun soon set and I decided to head back to my tent early and relax. An hour later, Jack walked in and asked if everything was okay. I told him everything is fine. I was just feeling a bit drained from the hike. I then asked Jack if he thinks anyone else is acting suspicious. He looks at me, but I feel a sinister aura about him. He He smiles innocently, and his pupils seem a little too big to be normal. Since there's a lot of sunlight outside, nope, everyone is acting normal. Although Emily does seem to be into you. I try not to act weird and end the conversation shortly after. I tell him I'm heading to sleep early. He soon leaves the tent, and everyone gathers around the campfire. I lie down to pretend I'm asleep. They're all talking normally, but as I doze off, I see all of their heads turn towards me and tilt so unnaturally that it shakes me awake. I blink and they're all back to normal, and saying they're turning in. Night 2. I can't sleep. I didn't want to after what I witnessed. Emily walks in again saying she can't sleep, and asks if she could sleep here again. Me being a bit freaked out, doesn't say anything but nod. She bites her lips and looks at me. She leans into my ear and says she's always wanted me, and begins undoing her top. I stop her, since that isn't how I want to picture Emily. I tell her that I'm not interested in her like that, and that I see her as a friend. She nods and lays down next to me. Hours go on and I fight the urge to fall asleep. Rubbing my eyes, I decided to open the tent to let in some breeze. And when I do, I see everyone's shadow from their tents. They aren't laying down. They're all straight up and staring at me. I slowly move my hand to shut the tent door, and look back at Emily who's asleep, but she's making a sound of something no human can make. These aren't my friends I'm with. Thinking quick, I unzip the back of my tent that faces away from camp, and grab my machete just in case. I get my bag that contains my keys and phone. I sneak out and very slowly walk backwards from the camp. I turn and run when I know I'm far enough away. Soon later, the loudest shriek tears around me, and I hear footsteps approaching me. I hide behind a log, and those same footsteps get louder and louder. What was a few minutes felt like an eternity, and they soon dash back the way they came, and soon after I book it to my car. The sun rises and I see my car, hop in, and turn the ignition. I press the gas and go faster than I should. I look back and see the faces of my friends, except it's not them. They're attached to these skinny creatures that tilt their heads viciously and points at me. I keep going till I make it home. My phone buzzes so many times, and when I reach the second gas station I check it. So many texts from everyone, and missed calls from my mom. I've been reported missing, and all of my friends were wondering where I was. The shocking part was that there was a recent text from an unknown number saying, "We'll get you next time." I don't know who or what they are, but this made me check code word with my friends to make sure they are who they say they are. I never got to find out what those things were, and what they wanted, but I knew if I fell asleep, I wouldn't make it back. The most important thing you should know about me is that I live alone. Most of my family is either dead or living in another continent, and the only close friend I've ever had has become someone I only contact once a year to wish happy birthday on Facebook. So when my girlfriend of 3 years and I broke up in March, I packed all my bags and moved halfway across the country for a fresh start. Honestly, I couldn't be happier. I've always liked being alone, and having only myself to answer to is kind of freeing. When I'm not working, I can do whatever I want. Regardless of what you might think, everything was going just fine until a week ago. The other night, I woke up around 2 a.m. with a desperate need to pee. I made my way to my bathroom only half awake, not bothering to turn on the lights. I tried to keep my eyes closed most of the time, so falling back asleep would be easier. I'm not sure what made me realize something was wrong, but as I sat there, squinting in the darkness, I became aware that something was watching me. I sat up a little straighter. My bathroom is small, barely fitting a bathtub, toilet, and sink. I could feel the side of the sink brush against my arm, and the shower curtain was only a few inches from my nose. There was nowhere for anyone to hide, not even a window for someone to peek through, but still, I felt eyes on me. Frozen, I tried to hold myself completely still, as I listened for an intruder. It was in this silence that I heard it. So quiet it was almost imperceptible. I could just make out the sound of someone else breathing. I could physically feel panic take over my body. Fear trickled down my limbs and seized my body tight. I thought my heart would stop, even as it pounded furiously in my chest. Someone was in my shower, hiding just behind the curtain. I was sure of it. The distance between the curtain and my face felt shorter than ever, and as I sat there, motionless, I could hear the breathing getting louder. Well, not louder. I realized with dawning horror, the breathing was getting closer. Whoever was behind the curtain, they were crouching down to my eye level. Suddenly, the curtain bulged outward, stretching towards my face slowly, patiently. The urge to run finally overcame my paralyzed body, and I stumbled off the toilet. I felt cold plastic graze my cheek. I didn't look back, but for the briefest moment in the small mirror over the sink, I could see something moving behind the disturbed curtain, hidden in the darkness of the shower. I ran into my bedroom and locked the door. I called the police as quickly as I could, forcing my shaking hands to cooperate. It felt like hours, crouching behind my bed and waiting, even though I know it was only minutes. When they finally came, they couldn't find any sign of an intruder or a forced entry. I filed a police report, but beyond that, there wasn't much they could do without any evidence. If that had been the end of it, everything would be fine. I'd be a nervous wreck for a while, sure, but I could get over it and move on. I've always found comfort in being alone, and I was determined that I wouldn't let my nerves get the better of me again. The thing is, I'm never alone anymore. The next incident occurred the following day at my job. I work in IT for a small company. The pay isn't all that great, but I needed something quick after my impulsive move, and I haven't bothered to keep looking for anything else yet. The building is old, split into a more renovated office section, and a musty warehouse with rooms for storage. I was making a trip to the break room in the older part of the building. I normally took my lunch a little earlier than the others in the office, so I could eat in peace. And because of that, I was the only person in the old section of the building. I made my way down the semi-dark hall, grabbed the door handle of the break room and started to open it. I had already half turned the knob, creaking with age, when something stopped me. I could feel someone watching me again. Slowly, I let the knob twist back into position, and took a step back away from the door. The building was silent, and I could see the light in the room was off under the bottom of the door, unless someone was sitting in the dark alone to eat their lunch. None of my coworkers were in the break room. I felt dread settle in my stomach. As I stood there, debating with myself, I began to hear a slow, steady breathing coming from behind the door. I backed away slowly. When I was a few steps farther from the door, the fluorescent light above it cut out, throwing a small section of the hallway and the door into darkness. I heard a soft creaking, and as my eyes adjusted, I could see the doorknob begin to turn. I turned and ran, hearing each fluorescent light above me turn off as I raced past it. I made it back to my desk, thankful that I had left the door separating the two parts of the building cracked earlier. After that, it started to follow me wherever I go. I can't open doors. It waits for me in every dark room, behind every shower curtain and closet door. Yesterday, it waited for me in every dressing room in the mall. I try not to think about what I saw in the gap between the floor and the bottom of the door. I'm not comfortable in my apartment anymore. I wish I could stay at a hotel for a few nights, but I can't spare the extra cash. And at this point, it wouldn't do much good anyway. I don't have any friends or family to stay with. I tried sleeping in my car, but I can still feel it there, waiting in the shadows below my windows, just barely out of sight. I can't take it anymore. As I lie in bed finishing this post, I can feel it watching me. The knob of my closet door is turning slowly left and right, gently rattling as it does. The door doesn't open, not even an inch, but I think I have to open the door. Wish me luck. My family just recently moved into this house that got renovated. It looked brand new from the outside, but from those around the neighborhood, the house had apparently been there since the 60s. After settling in, everybody in the family did their own thing. My mom would be away for work most of the time. My father would be inside his workroom. Me, watching TV or doing whatever in my room. And then my younger sister, playing by herself or with the dog. A few weeks in and nothing really new happened, but for some reason today my younger sister was louder than usual. Being somewhat curious, I followed the noise and found this small room, underneath the stairway. The door was open and I could see my sister looking at the closet inside. She just sat in front of it laughing. "Hey, everything good in there?" I called out. My sister looked at me and replied back with a yeah. She continued to look back at the closet. I tried to get a good look inside, but it was pretty dark inside of it. I eventually brushed it off as her probably using her imagination, or something of the likes. A couple of days later, and my sister was still going inside the room, just watching the closet. I would pass by the room from time to time, making sure to keep an eye out for my sister, but every time I passed by the room, I felt someone or something staring at me. Eventually I got used to my sister playing in that room, and continued to do my own thing, until my sister started going inside the closet. Very concerned, I called out to my sister, "What are you doing in there?" "I'm just playing with my friend." The closet doors were closed, and there was light coming from inside. I heard my sister's laughter from the closet, but for some reason I had this uneasy feeling. For the next few days my sister kept playing inside of it. I was still worried, but hearing my younger sister's laughter put me at ease for most of it. One day I passed by the room and I noticed that there was no laughter. The closet doors were closed, and I could see lights coming from the crack underneath the door. Curious, I went inside the room for once, and checked up on my sister. I called out her name and knocked on the closet door. No answer. I did this about 1 or 2 more times. Still no answer. "I can see your shadow from underneath," I said. I knocked on the doors one last time. Again, no answer. At this point I was about to open the closet door myself, but before I touched the handle, I heard a voice. "What are you doing?" It was my sister. It turns out she had been outside the entire time playing with the dog. I turned around to see my sister and I looked back at the closet. When I did, the lights were off. Scared, I pushed my sister out of the room and shut the door behind us. "Hey, why don't you stop playing in that room for a while?" I suggested to my sister. "How come?" she asked me. Because Dad said so." I lied. "Oh, okay." She dropped her head. "Why don't you go clean up and we can watch TV together?" Her head raised up again, and she nodded her head. "Okay." I let out a sigh as soon as she left. I stared at the door for a few minutes before going up to my dad to tell him what had happened. Soon enough, my dad installed a latch on the door, fearing that his daughter would enter the room again. Eventually we had to move again due to my mom being relocated for work. We settled into an apartment in the city this time. One morning, as my sister and I were eating breakfast, my dad comes into the dining room and turns on the TV. The first channel to come up was the news, and so my dad left it at that channel while he went to go make some breakfast. "Next on the news is about a serial killer," the newscaster went on to say. I looked at the TV for a little bit before going back to eating. "Hey look, there's our old house," my sister said. I looked up at the TV and there were pictures of our old house up on the news. Next to the pictures of the house was a picture of a young man with deadbeat eyes, uneven stubble, and shaggy hair. This man has been hiding away inside this house. My sister suddenly shouted out, "It's my friend." My name is Adam Fry, and I've never been one to believe in the supernatural. That is until about a month ago. So last month I was walking around my parents' property. They own 6 acres in a small town in Oklahoma. It was getting dark, so I was preparing to come inside. The way the land is, they have most of the field. They own horses, surrounded by barbed wire fencing, and where I was, I could see the fence at the end of the field near the road. I turned around and started walking back towards the barn. When about a solid 13 yards out, I saw something. It was just a silhouette, but I got really strange vibes from it. So I decided I'd just climb up one of the wood posts holding the barbed wire in place and hop the fence. I started walking up my driveway, but in the corner of my eye, something was moving. It was the silhouette. At first I thought maybe it was one of the horses, but the way it was moving seemed too human, but the shape it had was anything but that. I decided that I was just scaring myself and that it was probably just an animal, maybe a coyote. So I walked up the driveway and went into the house. It was dinner time, thank God, because with all the eeriness from that encounter, if you could even call it that, I was starving. I decided I'd hold off on telling my parents about what I saw because I don't know if they would just call me a baby or make fun of me for being scared of a shadow, but that was no shadow. After dinner I washed the dishes for them, dried them, and put them away. I sat and talked with my mom for a bit, mainly about politics and bills, boring adult stuff. I gave her a kiss on her forehead and decided I'd go to my room. I sat and grinded out a few hours of Destiny 2 on PlayStation, studied some poetry, and did a few drawings before deciding to call it a night. I turned the overhead lights off and turned on the heat lamp for the snake. I own a ball python. I laid down on my side, and right before I turned my phone on, I noticed something at the window. At first it looked like headlights from the road, but when I looked closely, I realized that they actually weren't headlights. They were eyes. Glowing yellow eyes. I jumped out of bed and went to tell my dad. He grabbed his gun out of the safe, and we headed towards my bedroom window. When we got there though, it was gone, with no trace. There were no footprints, no cuts in the field that was around my bedroom, and trust me, it's not an easy fence to climb or dig under. The only way through that fence is by cutting it. My dad passed it off as I probably saw one of the horses, and thought it was closer to my window than what it actually was. A few nights passed, and because I was petrified from what had happened, I decided to skip out on my nightly walk. Everyone was already asleep, and because my sleep schedule is so messed up, I was just starting to go to bed. It was roughly 3 or 4 in the morning, and then I heard it. 3 loud knocks on the front door, and then the doorbell rang. 6 times. My dad and I got up to see who it was, and because it was so early in the morning, and we live in the country, my dad had his gun with him in case it was a madman. We opened the door, and to our surprise, no one was there. Just a piece of paper that said, "Where were you?" Then the back door, 3 loud knocks. My dad was livid. If this is some prank, then they are really gonna regret this. I had never heard him so furious. When he opened the door, it wasn't a kid that was standing in the doorway. Shit, it wasn't even human. It stood roughly 6 foot, pale white, naked. Whatever skin on it was peeling away from the bone, even though it lacked the skin and muscle to form one. I could tell whatever it was grinning. Its eyes were sunken into its head, its dark yellow eyes. My dad stood in horror. He aimed his gun and pulled, but somehow the creature had vanished. That was roughly a month ago, and it hasn't come back. My mom doesn't believe my dad and I, but we know what we saw. I'll never forget those eyes. I am the best pilot of the state. I used to half joke with my family. It was debatable, but close to truth. None could fly an Apache attack helicopter as I did. In the Melbstrom Air Force Base, Western Montana. That fact would usually earn me some favor. Better maintenance for my bird overseas. Possibility to choose my posting. As well as, usually, more information than is offered to the other helicopter pilots during the briefings. Not this time. Colonel Harper, you want me to go blind? I grumbled, not hiding my incomprehension. You didn't even tell us where we are going. I had a few emergency takeoffs in my career, both in training and during live combat. Every time, you have at least some information. Someone is attacking your base. A nearby convoy has been ambushed. Something. I'm sorry, Hank. The look on the Harper's face told me he was honest. At least regarding his regrets. Can't tell you more. Just follow the procedure. More instructions will come once your squadron is in the air. Is this a drill? Let me know that at least. Is there an attack somewhere? Again, his face told me everything I needed to know. Harper did not know either what was going on. He took his orders from above, and nobody told him why Voodoo Squadron was being mobilized. It is not a drill. That's all I'm allowed to say. A creeping feeling went up my spine. Harper was the highest ranking officer regarding the defense of the base. Sure, there were some generals at Melmstrom, but everything that happened directly on the base had to go through Harper first. Everything. What kind of information or order did he receive to send his birds in the air without question? I didn't insist. There was no point. I went with my men, reviewing the briefing quickly with them, and we all walked to the landing pads and to our Apaches. Even though the moon was paler and brighter than I remembered it to be, the sky was very dark, as if the very light itself was absorbed by the few black clouds above our heads. "So what's up, Hank?" asked my gunner, Kim. She was the best gunner I'd ever flew with, and she shot as she talked, straight to the point. What's really up, I mean. There was no satisfactory answer, so I simply shrugged. She didn't seem happy with this lack of information, and was about to say something when I snapped my finger to get her attention, and made some eye movements to get her to look behind her. On the other side of the landing pads were two Blackhawks, transport helicopters already starting their rotors. They were our mission. The entirety of our official briefing could be summed up by, go in the air, stay with the Blackhawks. Every pilot supposed we would have to escort them, while they drop a Spec Ops team of elite soldiers. However, those that went inside the helicopters did not look like regular Spec Ops. What in God's name? Kim's loud exclamation made the other pilots and gunners of Voodoo Squadron look at the Blackhawks. While the soldiers that went inside the helicopters were obviously part of the same unit, as indicated by their black and red uniforms, none of them had the same weapon as the other. One had something that could only be described as a musket with a scope. Another carried a surprisingly large automatic grenade launcher, while a mountain of a man was equipped with a crude-looking two-handed hammer.
What are these guys? Tier 1?
Whispered Warren, the pilot of Voodoo too. No idea, I quietly answered, but I have a bad feeling about this. Eyes open, Voodoo, and be careful. 20 minutes later, our 4 Apaches and the 2 Blackhawks were in the air, flying north. The only additional order we received was to stay in formation with the 2 transport helicopters, and to let them lead the way. If anything, we were clear to engage, to protect the Hawks.
Clear to engage what?
Asked him pragmatically.
What are we expecting? Man-held missile launcher? AAA vehicles? Enemy flyers? I don't like this kind of order this close to Canada.
Continued Warren.
What if they also send people at the exact same place we are going? Wherever we are going. Do they want blue on blue? Because that's how you get blue on blue.
The conversation stopped there, and a dreadful silence fell on our squadron. Voodoo 4 indicated some funky, meteorological readings for a few seconds, and Kim failed to make a joke to ease the mood. But apart from that, we flew in radio silence. We went at low altitude, following valleys and rivers between forested hills and mountains. At first, there were still a few towns, then a couple of villages, and then some isolated houses high on the hills. Eventually, we arrived in an entirely wild area, with the trees shaking in the wind as the only sign of life. That's when I got a call by the lead Blackhawk.
Voodoo Squadron, we are closing in on our target. We'll deploy here. Stay low, weapons hot, and cover us. Once we hit the ground, take altitude and stay there. We'll contact you if we need you.
That was it. We were in the danger zone, and still they wouldn't tell us what to expect. I nonetheless spread out my squadron, forming a diamond around the Blackhawks to protect them from whatever could come. Anything on the radar? I nervously asked Kim.
Negative. Absolutely dark. The skies are ours.
This should have made me feel better, but for some reason, I felt worse. The forest seemed wrong somehow. There was absolutely nothing moving, either inside the forest or above. That made me realize something that froze my blood. We were flying in the middle of the night at low altitude over a wild forest. The threat of a lone animal flying inside the rear rotor was real. I was so focused on the mission that I didn't realize that yet, but... Where are the birds? I half whispered in the radio.
Come again, Voodoo Leader,
asked Warren. Where are the goddamn birds? We are alone in the skies. We are the only ones in the whole forest. Kim, whose position was right in front of me in the cockpit of the Apache, turned her head back at me, the deep discomfort she felt very visible on her face. She had been scanning the area with her thermal optics since we got here, looking for any threats.
You're right, Hank.
She started, her radio still on.
There's nothing. No animal movement on the ground. Scratch that. I've got movement.
Shouted Warren.
In the trees.
Before I answered, I instinctively looked in the trees right in front of me. The wind was quite strong, but nothing special. I was about to turn my helicopter around to support Warren, when I heard the click typical of my gunner activating the 30mm autocannon.
Got that too,
answered Kim. My eyes went again on the tree canopy, to no avail. My head-up display indicated where Kim was pointing her autocannon, so I focused my attention there. It was directly on our left, at our 10 o'clock, about 2 clicks from us. Something ungodly fast was jumping branch to branch, tree to tree, straight at us. The speed of the thing made my heart stop for a second. Holy, they're fast, I screamed, trying to keep my calm. I barely see them. It reminded me of how fast the smallest insects can move or fly. Except this thing was huge, larger than an adult man. I could barely see the shape of it, but it was vaguely humanoid. Nothing about its movement, however, was human. Kim didn't wait for my authorization to open fire. The autocannon followed her vision, and she sent a full salvo on the path of the shadow. Trees were cut in two by the high-caliber explosives, and the silence of the woody valley was instantly replaced by a storm of fire and metal. With the nerves that Kim was famous for, she kept her precision perfect, far better than I could follow. With the amount of ordnance sent in the trees, one 30mm round had to touch the thing, sooner or later, but still, it went on. Switch to Hydra. I gave the order, even though it was probably useless. She knew what had to be done. Kim launched a whole volley of unguided rockets that utterly destroyed the approximate location of the shadow, less than a kilometer from our helicopter. While destruction reigned, I considered gaining altitude. It would have been safer, but a quick look showed that the passengers from the Blackhawks were still in the process of fast roping into the trees. I was, for the briefest of moments, amazed by some of their equipment. One had a shoulder-mounted mortar that started shelling as soon as he started going down the rope, and this other guy was carrying... was that an iron shield? A scream in the radio got me out of this instant of daydreaming.
This is Voodoo 3, going down hard.
Instantly, my head turned to the imperiled Apache. His rear rotor was on fire, and the helicopter was spiraling out of control. There was a small explosion in the tail of the helicopter. The flames grew bigger, and I saw the black humanoid shape crawling on the side, going to the cockpit. Voodoo 3 eject, I shouted in the radio. You have one on you. Jim, Will, eject.
Negative,
answered Voodoo.
Instruments are non-responsive. I can't do any...
The radio was cut short when I saw the impossible thing rip apart the cockpit, take both John and Will, and plunge with them back inside the forest, leaving the Apache spiraling down to the ground. I tried to open a long-range communication with Malmstrom Base, but for some reason, I only got white noise back. I tried a second frequency, with the same result before giving up, for now. The creature that Kim tried to kill with the Hydra volley had reappeared from the burning inferno that his part of the hill had become, and was now going straight for the Blackhawks. A glance allowed me to see the strange spec ops had virtually finished their deployment. Finish this thing, Kim, I barked in the radio. From the side of my vision, I saw Voodoo 4 taking altitude while shooting its autocannon vertically. Directly below itself, rain hellfire. As one of the best pilot west of Denver, I had access to some cutting-edge equipment. My hellfires were one of them. In their most basic form, they are tank-busting missiles, each packing enough punch to destroy a T-90 kilometers away. Mine were reinforced with thermobaric warheads, and were made to raise fortified bunkers. That creature was going to be erased from existence.
Hank, I got a lock.
Kim was almost out of breath.
I have nothing on thermals. These things are... cold.
Then lock on the ground. Carpet bomb the area. 6 of the 8 missiles were launched in 2 seconds, each spreading to target a different area, all around the speeding freak. For half a second, a miniature sun lit the valley as 6 thermobaric detonations obliterated the hill that the creature was rushing through. I compensated the close-range shockwave so that my Apache wouldn't be knocked out of the sky, while the 2 Blackhawks, their passengers delivered, were thrown 100 meters away before they could stabilize. Apparently randomly, some trees burst into flames, victims of the thermal wave. Raging wildfires started to spread, but even then, the light of the flames seemed dimmed, and staring into the fire was not blinding. I could not explain the uneasiness that this brought upon me, but I felt cold, very cold, which, believe me, is not how you were supposed to feel when you unleash a volley of hellfire at point blank. The scream of Warren came next. It took me a few seconds to find his helicopter in the black skies. It was above us, according to my HUD, but I couldn't find out where he was. Even with the wildfire, I could not see a damn thing, except those dark clouds.
Going down. Repeats, I am going...
I barely heard him on the radio, as if he was screaming from the other side of an auditorium. As the echoes of his voice rang in my helmet, I saw Voodoo 2 plummeting through the air as a rock, straight to the trees. His fuel detonated soon after he touched the ground, and a large explosion shook my helicopter. I took some altitude, partly because of the explosion of Warren's helicopter, partly because I started to climb to get away from this hell. We had risen by about 80 feet when I heard Kim gasping. My HUD indicated she was still looking at the general area of where the shadowy shape we bombarded with hellfire used to be. I could not see what she saw.
Holy mother of...
was all I heard from Kim before my Apache was thrown out of control. I could not tell if it was an impact, or something just climbed aboard. I heard and felt Kim firing the autocannon, though I did not understand what she was shooting on.
We need to eject.
She shouted, visibly losing all senses to panic. Not until we gain some distance, I replied. I'm not jumping into this. Our Apache was cut in half. Right behind the cockpit, something tore the tail away. As Voodoo 2 before us, we plunged into the darkness below. I repeatedly pulled the eject switch to no avail. There was no way we would survive that. I heard Kim scream, and my voice joined her. I braced myself for impact and closed my eyes. When I opened them, I was still in the cockpit. Kim was unconscious in her gunner seat. Everything was dark outside, and I could not see more than 10 meters away, even with the wildfire that I could guess in the distance. I tried to wake up Kim by shaking her gently on the shoulder, but one of her bone made a very unpleasant sound, and I stopped. Looking more around, I noticed that we had landed at the top of a huge tree. First, this tree was way larger than what is usual for the region. Its vast branches twisted in impossible shapes. Second, even if it was made of the strongest wood, it should still collapse when half an armored helicopter fell on it. Either we fell slowly, or this was no wood. I took out my semi-automatic weapon and tried to get closer to the glass of the cockpit. I thought I saw something move in the distance, and I heard gunshots far, far away. Dread went up my spine, and I pushed my back against my seat. Something outside made a long, soft noise. Some sort of howl, then more gunshots, and an explosion. Just my luck. Now I'm thinking frantically about my next steps. What should I do? Should I try to stay inside the helicopter and wait for rescue? Make a run for it? Try to get Kim out of the cockpit and down on ground level? Should I go towards the gunshots and try to help? Or away? And hope this distraction will keep whatever lurks in the forest away from me?